Tonight, you're going to do something your ancestors did for hundreds of thousands of years in the middle of open grassland, surrounded by animals that could kill you in seconds. You're going to close your eyes, go completely unconscious, lie still for hours, and somehow, across millions of nights, across an entire species, that vulnerability didn't wipe you out. The real reason why has almost nothing to do with luck. Think about how insane that sounds for a moment. You are, biologically speaking, prey. Soft skin, no claws, no venom, no ability to outrun almost anything that wants to eat you. And yet, every single night, you voluntarily shut off your senses and lie motionless for 6 to 8 hours. If predators were simply waiting for an easy meal, sleep should have been the easiest meal on Earth. So why weren't your ancestors picked off, one sleeping camp at a time? Start with how predators actually hunt, because it's not what most people assume. Big cats, wolves, and most large predators aren't opportunistic killing machines attacking anything that holds still. They're ambush specialists, and ambush hunting runs on a very specific trigger: movement. Sudden, fleeing, panicked movement is what activates a predator's chase instinct. Something perfectly still doesn't fire that same trigger nearly as strongly. Researcher Craig Packer, who has spent decades studying lion behavior in the Serengeti, has documented how heavily lion hunting success depends on detecting motion and exploiting confusion in a fleeing herd. A stationary target, paradoxically, can be harder to commit to. There's no flight response to key off of. No obvious weakness to exploit in that instant. Stillness doesn't guarantee safety, but it removes one of the strongest signals predators rely on to decide who to chase. Now, here's where it gets even stranger and where actual field observation backs up something almost too specific to be a coincidence. In India's Sundarbans mangrove forest, one of the last strongholds of the wild Bengal tiger, honey collectors and fishermen faced a serious problem for decades. Tigers there were unusually willing to attack humans far more than tiger populations elsewhere. Wildlife officials studying the pattern noticed something crucial. Nearly every attack came from behind. Tigers in the Sundarbans were ambush predators, relying almost entirely on stalking an unaware target from the rear. So conservationists tried something that sounds almost too simple to work. They gave forest workers plastic masks painted with a human face to wear on the back of their heads. Suddenly, from the tiger's approach angle, every human appeared to be facing them, watching them at all times. Attacks in areas where the masks were worn dropped dramatically. The tigers weren't ignoring humans out of mercy. They were responding to the same ancient calculation every ambush predator makes. Is this target aware of me? Because an aware target is a dangerous one, capable of fighting back, screaming, alerting others, turning an easy kill into a costly fight. Doesn't that reframe the entire question? It was never really about sleep itself. It was about whether the sleeper looked defended. This is where your ancestors' actual behavior becomes the real answer. And it's far more clever than simply hoping for the best. Anthropologist David Sampson, who has spent years studying sleep among the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer community in Tanzania, made a discovery that reshapes how you should think about a night around an ancient campfire. Using motion tracking devices, Sampson's research found that at almost any given moment during the night, at least one member of the group was awake. Not the same person all night. The pattern rotated unconsciously through the group, driven by natural individual differences in sleep timing and depth. In other words, the camp itself was never fully asleep. It only looked that way from a distance. Someone was always stirring, shifting position, glancing at the dark tree line, feeding the fire. To a predator, sizing up the situation from the shadows, that constant low-level movement and awareness sent exactly the same signal the tiger masks in the Sundarbans would send thousands of years later. Somebody here is watching. And the ambush calculation shifted immediately from easy opportunity to risky confrontation. Fire itself did enormous work here too. Predators, especially nocturnal hunters like lions and hyenas, show a well documented aversion to open flame and bright, flickering light, both because of the unpredictable visual disruption it causes to night vision and the simple, ancient association between fire and danger. A sleeping group wrapped in darkness would have been vastly more vulnerable than the same group curled around a controlled, crackling fire, throwing shifting light and motion across the campsite, even while most bodies lay still. So layer these pieces together, constant rotating wakefulness within the group. Fire disrupting a predator's confidence and night vision. Group sleeping itself, since predators overwhelmingly prefer isolated, easily cornered targets over a cluster of bodies that could collectively respond. None of these were conscious strategies your ancestors sat down and designed. They were behaviors that simply worked better than the alternative, generation after generation, until they became baked into how humans instinctively sleep together even now. Feel how much of this survives in you today, completely unconsciously. Notice how much harder it is to fall asleep in an unfamiliar place, alone, compared to somewhere familiar and secure. That isn't random anxiety. Researcher Charles Nunn, who has studied sleep architecture across primates and its relationship to predation risk, has pointed out that species facing higher historical predation pressure tend to show lighter, more fragmented sleep patterns, precisely the kind that allow for quick waking at the first sign of danger. Your own sleep, lighter and more easily disrupted than many other mammals your size, may itself be a fossil. Not a flaw in your biology, but a feature carried forward from a world where the cost of sleeping too deeply, too obliviously, was measured in survival itself. There's a certain irony sitting inside all of this. You probably think of sleep as the moment you're most defenseless. In a strict physical sense, you are. But defenselessness was never really the deciding factor for a predator watching from the tree line. Detection was. A body that looks aware, surrounded by others who might wake at any second, guarded by flickering firelight that unsettles a predator's confidence, isn't actually the easy target it appears to be at first glance. So tonight, when you finally close your eyes, understand what's actually happening underneath that stillness. Somewhere deep in your nervous system, mechanisms shaped across hundreds of thousands of nights are still quietly running, sleeping lighter than they need to, waking easier than they should, as if some part of you still remembers a fire, a group, and a tree line that might be watching back. You were never actually as vulnerable as sleep made you look. And maybe that's the real reason predators so often left your ancestors alone. Not because you were hidden from the dark, but because in ways you never had to consciously plan. You never quite let the dark be sure you were asleep at all.